The people from this neighborhood looked at this man's yard in complete amazement. He was hauling in tire after tire, filling up his garden to the brim. At first, most of the residents kept mocking his efforts and thought he was losing it. But that all changed when they realized what his real intentions were. But before we continue, smash the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss our upcoming stories. At first, Frank saw Bill carrying in a couple of tires at a time by hand. Bill was carrying them from somewhere behind his shed and placing the tires against the garden fencing. Frank logically assumed that it would be just a handful of them. Maybe Bill was helping someone clean out a garage. But as the piles against the fence started growing, and Bill continued to carry in tire after tire without any other item in between, the situation got quite a bit stranger. At this point, Frank left the comfort of his kitchen and stepped into the garden to observe the strange scene. And as Frank made his way across his lawn, he was just in time to see his neighbor take things up a notch. Carrying tires one at a time was apparently not cutting it. As Frank reached the fence between their houses, he saw Bill backing up his car with an attached trailer behind it. A sharp beeping sound came from the Chevy pickup truck that Bill drove as it backed up into the garden space. After it came to a halt, Bill stepped out and unlatched the back end of the trailer. Within seconds, dozens of tires rolled off the trailer and landed onto the grass pasture. Frank, taking a sip of his morning coffee, asked his neighbor what he was doing. As a response, Bill looked up at Frank with a slightly nervous and caught-off-guard look on his face. Bill's pale face looked to the ground as he muttered a few clearly rehearsed words. His explanation was that it was nothing much, just some spring cleaning. Frank didn't believe any of it, but when he pressed a bit further, Bill closed off completely and only grunted as he got back in his car. Bill was hiding something, but Frank couldn't tell yet what it was. To avoid further conversation, Bill drove off in his pickup truck, leaving behind a tire-filled mess of a garden. A few hours later, Bill returned, but by then, the entire neighborhood was awake and aware of the strange situation. Groups of people circled the old man's house, whispering amongst each other as they stared at the scene. Some were taking photos, and Frank had already seen a few of them appear on Facebook. It was as if the outside intrigue of this place was growing just as fast as the piles of tires were. People mocked Bill, stating that he was losing it. Some even accused him of robbing the town's junkyard, wondering aloud where else one man could get so many tires. But Bill didn't care. He ignored all the talk and kept working day and night, hauling in black rubber wheels until they stuck out high above the fencing. Even though Frank gave up trying to interrupt Bill in whatever he was building, he couldn't help but feel intrigued by it. As a result, Frank found himself staring out of his bedroom window daily until way past midnight. This much to the irritation of his wife, who kept trying to get him to come to bed. Frank's curious thoughts turned to frustration. He wondered what the hell Bill was doing out there. The man was close to retirement age, yet he was working 14-hour shifts, logging in tire after tire like it was the most important job in the world. Frank felt he had to know what Bill was up to. By the end of the week, it became clear that not only Frank and the neighborhood had noticed something was amiss with Bill. During the early morning hours on Friday, an angry man rang his doorbell and pounded on his front door with a fist. Frank took notice and came out to greet the man. Frank greeted the man, asking if he could help him. The man shifted his body away from the door, still holding his hand in a tightly formed fist as he looked at Frank. He asked if Frank had seen the man who lived there, explaining that Bill wouldn't open up. Frank explained that Bill had just driven off, likely to get more tires. Frank added that Bill would probably return in about an hour or so, as he had been going in and out like clockwork all week. The man looked confused, not yet understanding what this meant, but he was about to. And when Frank found out who this unknown, angry man was, things escalated quickly. The man explained that he was Bill's boss, and apparently Bill had been absent from work without a proper reason. Bill's boss explained that Bill was normally very punctual. While quiet and preferring to work alone, he was never late, not once. Bill's boss explained that he had already called numerous times, but no one ever answered. Frank replied honestly that he wasn't sure what was going on. He took a few steps back so he could see the fencing that separated their gardens from the front lawn. Frank told Bill's employer that he bet it had something to do with what was going on in the backyard and that the boss had to see it. Frank led Bill's boss around the corner of the house, unsure what the man would say when he saw the sight. The piles of tires looked even taller now, nearly swallowing the garden whole. You could hardly tell where the lawn once ended and the back of the house began. Nothing but black rubber everywhere. Bill's boss stopped in his tracks, staring wide-eyed at the backyard. Tires were stacked at least 9 feet high, blocking out any view of the garden below. The only thing still visible behind the tires was the top part of Bill's house and the roof of a small shed hunched off to one side. On the other side of the tire mountain, people walked by on the road parallel to the backyard. They all slowed down, craning their necks to get a better look. Frank could hear the muffled laughter and voices from the street. Someone called out that Bill was going crazy and had finally lost it. Frank fell silent. He'd spent the whole week thinking about Bill's strange project. Still, he didn't like it when people mocked his neighbor in that manner. However, protecting Bill's sanity after witnessing this was difficult. It was like staring at a rubber fortress, and he still had no idea why it existed. Bill's boss stood with his hands on his hips, frowning as he took in the scene. He muttered quietly, more to himself than to Frank, wondering what Bill was doing there. Frank shrugged, admitting that the question had been on his mind for days and that he had tried to figure it out all week. Then, Bill's boss looked at Frank with a sudden boldness. He suggested that perhaps they should go into the garden and find out. Frank hesitated, because he had never dared to set foot into Bill's yard before. But with Bill's boss beside him, he felt braver. 2 pairs of eyes were better than one. With Bill now absent from his home, they had a window of opportunity to get a closer look. If there was any time to get answers, it was now. The 2 men carefully climbed over a small part of the fence that tires hadn't yet swallowed up. They landed on a narrow strip of ground right beside the wall. Bill's boss did so firmly on both feet, but Frank slipped and hit the ground with the lower part of his back first. There was barely enough space to move. All around them, the tires towered overhead, making navigating through the long and narrow garden pretty hard. Staying close to the fence, Frank and Bill's boss started inching their way through the crowded, rubber-filled yard until they eventually reached the shed in the middle. Even there, they had to move slowly. With his back still firmly against the shed, Frank reached out, feeling the shed's door handle with his hand. He noted that it was open. Frank went in first. He could hardly see anything in front of him. The darkness inside the shed made every step unknown. Bill's boss followed behind, both men whispering and moving as quietly as possible. Inside the shed, it was almost pitch black. The faint light from the garden barely made it past the piles of tires at the doorway. Frank took a slow step forward, feeling around carefully with his hands stretched out in front of him. His fingers finally touched the cold metal of a light switch on the wall just beside the door. Turn the switch, and suddenly a bright light flickered on overhead. The entire inside of the shed was revealed in one instant, both men blinking against the sudden brightness. They expected to find a mostly empty wooden building where most people would store their lawnmower and some scattered garden tools. But this shed held nothing of the sort. This place looked more like a madman's workshop than anything else. There was a long workbench running the length of the back wall, covered in all kinds of intricate tools. The walls were plastered with blueprints and sketches taped up everywhere, and together they seemed to form one large pattern that stretched across the entire backdrop. Frank stepped further, staring at the blueprints with wide eyes. The sketches were filled with details of large tire structures, metal frames, and odd twisting designs that made no immediate sense. Both of them scanning the drawings, trying to figure out what all these strange plans meant. Bill's boss whispered, asking what the hell Bill was building, his eyes narrowing as he looked closer at a diagram showing tires stacked in a strange spiral. Frank shook his head, just as confused as his companion. But before they could figure out any of the blueprints, they heard a sound from outside in the garden. It was the unmistakable bleeping noise of Bill's pickup truck backing up. The two men froze, exchanging worried looks as they listened to the trailer flap open. Tires dropped onto the ground, one after another, each sound making Frank more anxious. Then, footsteps crunched closer to the shed. Bill was coming. Panic set in quickly. Frank glanced at the door handle just as it started to move. He grabbed Bill's boss by the shoulder, whispering that they needed to hide, and fast. The two of them scanned the shed for a hiding place. The only spot big enough was a large storage closet in the far corner. They sprinted as quietly as possible toward the closet, ducking low and squeezing behind it together. The door to the shed creaked open only seconds later. Frank held his breath and pressed himself against the back wall of the closet. Bill stepped inside, his heavy footsteps echoing through the suddenly silent shed, and immediately noticed something was wrong. The light above his workbench was still on, bright and humming in the small space. He grunted, staring up at it, and then shouted, yelling that they were trespassing on his property. Frank watched as Bill grabbed a large, heavy tire lever from the workbench and started hammering it down hard against the wooden top. The loud banging echoed through the shed, and Bill's voice was shaking with real anger. Frank knew they were in the wrong in breaking into his property and had no way out. Frank stepped out from behind the closet with his hands raised. He hoped Bill would see he meant no harm. Bill's boss came out from behind the closet as well, quickly apologizing for sneaking inside. The boss explained that they were sorry and shouldn't have come in like that, adding that with all the rumors, the noise, and Bill not showing up for work, people had started saying things. Frank insisted they weren't trying to make fun of him, they just wanted to understand what was happening. He finished by saying Bill had to admit it all looked very strange from the outside. He still looked upset, but some of the anger had faded from his face. He glanced at the two men, and then at the blueprints on the wall. After a long moment, Bill sighed and finally nodded, promising to explain everything to them. Bill admitted that he knew it must have looked crazy, but insisted he had a reason. The tires weren't junk. They were part of something important to him. He explained that he had been collecting the tires to build a massive playground for the children in the neighborhood. Bill had grown up poor, and the only happy memories he had were playing on old tires behind a local garage. He wanted to give that same simple happiness to kids in the neighborhood. The blueprints showed detailed plans for swings, climbing walls, tunnels, and even a tire maze, all designed for safety and fun. Bill had used his free time and some missed work days to build it himself because he couldn't afford to hire anyone. He wanted the playground to be a surprise. Frank and Bill's boss listened in silence, realizing just how wrong they and the neighborhood had been. Bill wasn't losing his mind or planning anything dangerous. He was quietly trying to build something beautiful for others without asking for recognition or help. It was a gift he wished someone had given him as a child. Word soon spread about what Bill was really building. The neighborhood came together to finish the playground, and in the end, the children's laughter became the real reward. Bill's yard was no longer just full of tires, it was full of life. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss amazing tales like this one.